My mother-in-law destroyed the heirloom I'd spent 6 months restoring and ridiculed my painful medical struggles in front of 50 guests. I stayed perfectly silent. I just closed the antique lid and exposed a reality that dismantled her entire existence. Starting today, I am done shrinking to fit into this toxic dynasty. The sticky espresso martini dripped slowly off the mahogany edge, pooling into the delicate ivory keys. 50 elite guests went completely silent. This was the Whitmore family's annual summer gala at a sprawling rental estate in Lake Tahoe. Vivienne was the matriarch, a 60-year-old socialite who valued bank accounts over human decency. I was the disappointing daughter-in-law. To my clients, I was a senior forensic auditor. To this family, I was just the middle-class nobody who couldn't give them an heir. I had arrived at the estate 3 days early to oversee the delivery of the piano. It was a 1922 Steinway Grand. It belonged to Edmund, my husband's late grandfather, the only person in this family who ever showed me an ounce of genuine kindness. When Edmund passed away, the family fought over his stock portfolios and real estate. They left the piano to rot in a damp storage unit in Connecticut. I asked for it, and Vivienne practically threw the claim ticket at me, calling it a piece of junk taking up space. For the past 6 months, I had spent every weekend restoring it in our garage. I stripped the warped veneer. I sourced period-accurate brass pedals. I paid a master technician a small fortune to restring and tune it perfectly for tonight. It was my gift to Callum, a piece of his grandfather brought back to life. The gala started at 6. The caterers were circulating with champagne flutes and miniature crab cakes. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted pine from the surrounding forest. The moment I walked into the grand room at 7:15 p.m., Vivienne sneered. She was wearing a silk dress that cost more than my first car. "Oh, the help is finally here," she said, loud enough for a group of tech executives to hear. "Fetch more ice." I ignored her. I was used to the digs. But then her oldest son, Prescott, wandered over. Prescott was an aggressive venture capitalist who wore too much cologne and treated every interaction like a hostile takeover. He had a half-empty espresso martini in his hand. He chuckled at something Vivienne said and rested his wet condensation-soaked glass directly on the polished mahogany lid of the Steinway. I walked over, my heart rate picking up. "Prescott, please use a coaster," I asked quietly. "Or just put it on the bar. The finish is extremely sensitive." He rolled his eyes and didn't move it. Vivienne stepped between us. Her eyes were hard and flat. "Don't speak to him like a toddler in my house," she snapped. She grabbed Prescott's glass. She didn't just move it. She lifted it, locked eyes with me, and deliberately poured the dark, sticky liquid straight into the exposed hammers of the Steinway. The strings hissed. The liquid seeped into the felt. My chest seized. "It's just rotting wood," Vivienne scoffed loudly, her voice carrying over the string quartet in the corner. "Maybe if your body wasn't so broken, you could focus on raising a child instead of obsessing over dead furniture." Dead silence. I had suffered my 3rd miscarriage just 2 weeks prior. The grief was still a heavy, suffocating physical weight in my chest. Some mornings I couldn't breathe. I was still bleeding. Everyone in that room knew it. The guests stared, holding their breath, waiting for me to break. They expected me to run out of the room in tears, the way I had at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Instead, something inside me just stopped. The fear, the desire to be accepted, the endless apologizing for existing, it evaporated. I walked past Vivienne. I went straight to the sound system in the corner. I reached behind the console and pulled the master plug from the wall. The string quartet's amplifiers cut out. The room plunged into a heavy, ringing quiet. I opened my leather handbag. I pulled out a stack of thick manila envelopes. I walked back to the center of the room and handed the first one to Prescott. He looked at it, confused, then opened the clasp. His smug smile vanished the second he read the first page. The color drained from his neck. I looked at Vivienne. My voice was dead calm. "I don't just crunch numbers for small businesses. I specialize in corporate asset recovery. And for 14 months, I've been tracking the $6.4 million Prescott supposedly lost in that commercial real estate crash." I walked over to the bar, where 2 of Prescott's primary business partners were standing. I handed them the second envelope. "He didn't lose it," I said, making sure every word echoed in the silent room. "He transferred it through shell companies in Cyprus to buy Vivienne's new yacht. The rest went to fund his gambling debts in Macau. The bank statements, wire transfers, and IP logs are all in there." Prescott lunged at me. His face was purple, veins bulging in his forehead. He didn't even get within 3 feet of me. Callum, my quiet, gentle husband, the marine biologist they all mocked for not working in finance, stepped between us. He shoved his brother backwards so hard Prescott crashed into a cocktail table, sending shattered glass and hors d'oeuvres across the hardwood floor. "You touch her, you leave in an ambulance," Callum growled. His voice was low, and it scared the hell out of the entire room. Vivienne shrieked. She started pointing fingers, screaming that I was insane, threatening to have us blacklisted from every social circle on the East Coast. I just smiled. I closed the lid of the ruined Steinway, linked arms with Callum, and walked out into the cool mountain air. We didn't go back to our hotel. We drove straight to the airport. By Tuesday morning, the consequences hit. The SEC raided Prescott's downtown office. It wasn't a quiet inquiry. Federal agents carried out boxes of hard drives and physical ledgers. His firm's assets were frozen immediately. By Wednesday, the 2 major investors from the Tahoe party filed emergency lawsuits to prevent him from liquidating his personal accounts. A week later, Vivienne received a formal summons. It wasn't a casual text from a family lawyer. It was a certified legal mandate compelling her to appear at the federal bankruptcy courthouse in Manhattan at exactly 9:00 a.m. The mediation room was sterile and cold. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Vivienne and Prescott walked in looking hollowed out. Prescott was sweating through his charcoal suit. His hands were shaking. Vivienne's designer makeup couldn't hide the deep bruised circles under her eyes. She looked like a woman who had just realized the floor beneath her was made of paper. They walked in expecting to see a ruthless ruthless federal liquidator or insect compliance officer. Instead, Callum and I sat on the other side of the heavy oak table. Beside us sat a senior acquisitions attorney named Marcus Kellner. "What is this?" Vivienne demanded, her voice shaking. She looked frantically around the empty room. "Where is the mediator? Where is the bankruptcy judge?" Callum placed a thick leather-bound binder on the table. "There is no mediation," he said, his voice hard as stone. "Your primary creditor didn't just freeze your accounts. They panicked. They sold your defaulted debt packages at a severe discount to a private holding firm." Prescott swallowed hard. He looked sick. "Who bought it? Which firm?" "I did," Callum replied. Vivienne let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "You? With what money? You look at algae for a living." "3 years ago, I patented an oceanic filtration system," Callum said slowly, letting every word sink in. "It was acquired by a major tech conglomerate for 8 figures. I kept it private because I knew the second you found out, you'd only see me as an ATM. You'd expect me to fund Prescott's failures. But when Nadia found the fraud, I didn't just sit on that capital. I used it to buy your debt." "You own our debt?" Vivienne whispered, the arrogance finally stripping away. "I own the mortgage on your Nantucket estate," Callum corrected. "I own the collateral on Prescott's penthouse in Tribeca. I own the cars. I own the yacht you bought with stolen money. I own it all." Prescott dropped his head onto the table and started weeping. It was a pathetic, gasping sound. He reached across the wood, his fingers grasping at the air near Callum's hands. He begged his brother for an extension. He swore he could liquidate a minor portfolio, that he just needed 60 days to move some funds from a blind trust. Callum just stared at him. He didn't blink. He didn't offer a shred of comfort. Vivienne sat perfectly still. The shock seemed to paralyze her for a long minute. But then, very slowly, her posture changed. The panic receded, replaced by something cold and familiar. She reached into her immaculate leather tote bag and pulled out a single, folded sheet of heavy stock paper. She slid it across the table toward Callum. "You think you're very clever, dragging us in here," Vivienne said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think you hold the cards because you bought a few bad loans. But you forgot one detail about the Nantucket estate." Callum didn't touch the paper. Marcus, our attorney, pulled it toward him and unfolded it. As Marcus read, I watched a muscle feather in his jaw. "What is it, Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "It's a deed of irrevocable transfer," Marcus said, looking up. He adjusted his glasses, his professional detachment slipping just a fraction. "Dated 4 years ago. The Nantucket property isn't in Vivienne's name. It's not even in the family trust anymore. I transferred the title," Vivienne said, a thin, cruel smile returning to her face. "Long before Prescott's little liquidity issues. I transferred it to a blind corporate entity. And guess who the primary signatory is on that entity, Callum?" Callum finally looked at the paper. His face went entirely blank. "I used your signature," Vivienne said smoothly, "from the power of attorney you granted me when you were doing your field research in the Pacific. You don't own my debt, Callum. Legally speaking, you own the entity that defaulted. You just bought your own fraud." The fluorescent lights above us buzzed louder. The air in the room felt instantly heavy. I looked at the signature on the bottom of the page. It was Callum's handwriting, unmistakable and binding. Prescott stopped crying and lifted his head, a sickening realization dawning on his tear-stained face. He looked at his mother, then at us. "If we go down," Vivienne said, leaning forward until her chest pressed against the edge of the oak table, "the SEC doesn't stop at my doorstep. They come for your holding firm. They come for your 8-figure payout. I will drag you both into federal prison with me before I let you take my house." Marcus slid the paper back into the center of the table. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me. And in that one glance, I knew exactly how bad this was. The numbers I had crunched, the paper trails I had followed to the ends of the earth. I had missed a ghost entity. Callum reached out and picked up the paper. His hand wasn't shaking, but his knuckles were white. He read the clause at the bottom, the one that tied the entire Whitmore financial collapse directly to his personal social security number. Vivienne sat back and crossed her arms. "So," she said, her voice dripping with the same venom she had used at the party, "are we going to talk about a restructured payment plan? Or should I call the authorities right now and tell them my son is operating a fraudulent shell company?" The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like it was pressing against my eardrums. Prescott was wiping his nose with a silk pocket square, a sickening look of relief washing over his face. He actually believed his mother had just saved him. Callum didn't shout. He didn't slam his fist on the table. He just looked at the woman who had given birth to him, really looked at her, as if he were studying a completely unfamiliar species of deep-sea predator. "You used the power of attorney I gave you to manage my student loans while I was at sea," Callum said. His voice was entirely devoid of emotion. "You used it to set up a blind trust to hide your assets from your own creditors." "I protected the family legacy," Vivienne corrected smoothly. She reached out and tapped her manicured fingernail against the heavy stock paper. "And right now, that legacy is the only thing keeping you out of federal custody. So, Marcus, why don't you draw up the restructuring paperwork? We'll take a 95% haircut on the principal and a 50-year repayment term at 0 interest. I think that's fair, considering the alternative." Marcus leaned back in his chair. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He didn't look intimidated, just profoundly tired. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said slowly, "if you're admitting to utilizing a limited power of attorney to execute fraudulent asset transfers to evade creditors, you are confessing to a felony in front of a licensed attorney and a forensic auditor." "I'm admitting nothing," Vivienne snapped, though her eyes darted toward the door for a split second. "I am simply pointing out whose name is on the ownership documents of the entity currently tied up in Prescott's mess. If you report us, you report him. The SEC freezes everything, including Callum's precious 8-figure buyout. That was the real threat. Not prison, but paralysis. If the SEC opened an investigation into Callum, his accounts would be locked. The tech conglomerate that bought his patent would likely trigger a morality or fraud clause and claw back the funds. He would would be ruined before he ever saw a courtroom. Vivienne knew exactly what she was doing. I reached across the table and pulled the deed of transfer toward me. The paper was thick and expensive. The signature at the bottom was Callum's, but it was slightly pixelated around the edges. It was a digital copy of a physical signature, authorized via a secure document portal. I looked at the date, October 14th, 4 years ago. I looked at Callum. Where were you on October 14th, 4 years ago? Callum stared at the date. He didn't even have to look at a calendar. The Marianas Trench expedition. We were stationed out of Guam. I was on the research vessel Nautilus for 6 weeks. Did you have internet access? I asked. Only text-based satellite email for emergencies, he said, catching on. No broadband. No ability to log into a secure legal portal or authorize a digital signature. Vivienne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, crossing her legs and smoothing her skirt. Good luck proving an it failure to a federal judge while your accounts are locked, Callum. The wheels of justice turn very slowly when you're under indictment. You want to spend the next 5 years paying lawyers to prove you were on a boat? Go ahead. She stood up. Prescott scrambled to his feet, grabbing his briefcase like a frightened child following his mother out of the principal's office. You have 48 hours to send the restructuring paperwork to my attorneys, Vivienne said, looking down her nose at me. If I don't have it by Friday morning, I make the call. She turned and walked out. Prescott hurried after her, not daring to look back at us. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. Callum let out a long, slow breath. He reached up and rubbed his eyes. For the first time since we walked into this building, he looked exhausted. Can she do that? He asked Marcus. Can she just snap her fingers and freeze my accounts? Marcus put his glasses back on. He looked grim. If she submits this document to the SEC investigators currently tearing apart Prescott's firm, yes, it links you to the defaulted debt. They will issue a freeze order on your assets pending investigation. It's standard procedure. By the time we prove the signature was fraudulently applied, you'll be tied up in litigation for years. So she wins, Callum said quietly. She always wins. No, I said. Both men looked at me. I was still staring at the deed of transfer. She doesn't win, I said, sliding the paper toward Marcus, because she made a mistake. A really stupid, arrogant mistake. Nadia, it's my signature, Callum said gently. Even if we prove I was on the boat, it's not about the signature, I interrupted. It's about the notary. I pointed to the bottom left corner of the page. There was a digital notary stamp authenticating the signature and the identity of the person signing. Look at the name of the notary, I said. Marcus leaned in. Arthur Penhaligon, licensed in the state of New York. I've been auditing Prescott's firm for 14 months, I said, my pulse finally starting to settle into a steady rhythmic beat. I know every name that passed through their payroll, their contractor ledgers, and their shell companies. Arthur Penhaligon isn't just a random notary. Who is he? Callum asked. He's the CFO of the Cypriot shell company Prescott used to buy Vivienne's yacht, I said. He's an employee of the fraud, which means this document wasn't notarized by a neutral third party. It was rubber stamped by a co-conspirator. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and grabbed a pen. If the notary is structurally compromised, the document is void ab initio. It's legally entirely invalid from the moment of inception. Exactly, I said. But it's better than that. If Vivienne submits a void document to the SEC, she isn't just tipping them off to a shell company. She's submitting forged federal documents to an active investigation. That's not a civil penalty, Marcus. That's criminal obstruction. Marcus started writing furiously. We don't wait for her to make the call. We preempt her. We file an emergency injunction with the bankruptcy court claiming identity theft and fraud, and we name Arthur Penhaligon as a hostile witness. Callum watched us, the heavy exhaustion in his face slowly giving way to something sharper. But there was no joy in it. He was watching his mother's complete destruction take shape on a yellow legal pad. How long do we have before she realizes she's exposed? Callum asked. She won't realize it, I said. Vivienne doesn't understand the mechanics of what she does. She just barks orders and expects the hired help to make it legal. She thinks she holds a loaded gun. Marcus stood up and started packing his briefcase. I need to get back to the office. I have 3 paralegals who are about to cancel their dinner plans. We file the injunction at 8 Atrallo am tomorrow. We walked out of the federal building into the harsh midday sun of Manhattan. The heat was oppressive, radiating up from the concrete. Callum held my hand, his grip tight. We didn't speak on the cab ride back to our hotel. There was nothing left to say. We were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. When we got to our room, I kicked off my heels and sat on the edge of the bed. My body ached. The physical toll of the last few weeks, the miscarriage, the sleepless nights restoring the piano, the adrenaline of the confrontation was finally catching up to me. My lower abdomen cramped, a dull, familiar ache that made me want to curl into a ball and disappear. Callum went to the minibar, poured 2 glasses of water, and brought one to me. He sat beside me on the mattress. Are you okay? He asked softly. I'm tired, I admitted, leaning my head against his shoulder. I'm so tired, Callum. He wrapped his arm around me and kissed the top of my head. Tomorrow, Marcus files the injunction. We let the lawyers handle the rest. We go home. We don't ever have to see them again. I closed my eyes, wanting to believe him. At 4 p.m., my cell phone rang. It was sitting on the glass desk across the room. I ignored it. It rang again, and then a third time. Callum got up and checked the screen. He frowned. It's an unknown number. Let it go to voicemail, I said, keeping my eyes closed. He did. But a minute later, my phone chimed with a text message. Callum picked it up, unlocked the screen, and read it. His jaw tightened. What is it? I asked, sitting up. Callum handed me the phone. The message was from a number I didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. Nadia, it's Prescott. Do not let Marcus file anything tomorrow. Mom doesn't know I'm texting you. You think you found the bottom of this, but you didn't. If you blow up the Cypriot shell company, you don't just take down Mom and me, you expose the original seed money. I stared at the text. I typed back quickly. What seed money? The reply came almost instantly. family. Grandpa Edmonds. He didn't leave it to Mom. He hid it. And if you go to the sec, they seize it all. Meet me at the Oyster Bar in Grand Central in an hour. Alone, I handed the phone back to Callum. He read the screen, his eyes scanning the two short sentences over and over. He's lying, Callum said finally. His voice was flat, but his thumb traced the edge of the phone case. Grandpa's estate was settled 7 years ago. The probate lawyers combed through every account, every safe deposit box. There was nothing left but the house in Connecticut and a few depleted mutual funds. Prescott isn't smart enough to invent a bluff this specific, I said, sliding my feet back into my heels. And he's too terrified to try. He's panicked. You're not going, Callum said. It wasn't a demand, it was a plea. Nadia, this is exactly how they operate. They isolate, they make threats, they divide us. We let Marcus file the injunction. We let the federal investigators do their jobs. If there's even a fraction of a % chance that he's telling the truth about Edmund's money, I have to know, I said. I stood up and grabbed my handbag. I missed the notary, Callum. I spent 14 months in his ledgers, and I missed the CFO rubber stamping a deed transfer. I'm not going to be blindsided again. If I know what the seed money is, I can tell Marcus how to shield it before the sec drops the hammer. Callum stood up. Then I'm coming with you. No, I said, stepping close to him. Prescott is an arrogant coward. He won't talk if you're there. He feels emasculated by you right now, and his ego won't let him admit weakness in front of the brother he's spent his whole life bullying. He asked for me because he thinks I'm just the auditor. He thinks he can negotiate with me. Callum stared at me for a long moment. He hated it, but he knew I was right. 45 minutes, he said. If I don't hear from you by 5:30, I'm walking into the Oyster Bar with the police. Deal, I said. Grand Central Terminal was a chaotic, echoing cathedral of commuters at 5 o'clock. I navigated through the main concourse, the heat of the city instantly replaced by the cool, stale air of the station. I walked down the ramp toward the dining concourse, the familiar, briny smell of the Oyster Bar hitting me before I even pushed through the heavy doors. The restaurant was loud, the vaulted tile ceilings bouncing every clinking glass and burst of laughter back down into the room. It wasn't the kind of place you chose for a secret meeting. It was the kind of place you chose when you were afraid the person you were meeting might record you, and you needed enough background noise to ruin the audio. Prescott wasn't entirely stupid. I spotted him sitting in a curved booth in the back corner. He had shed his suit jacket and tie, his collar was unbuttoned, and he was staring into a glass of amber liquid, looking 10 years older than he had at the courthouse this morning. I slid into the booth across from him. I didn't order a drink. I just folded my hands on the paper placemat and waited. He looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot. Where is it? I asked. I need a guarantee, Prescott said. His voice was entirely stripped of the booming, venture capitalist bravado. He sounded like a frightened teenager. I need you to call your lawyer right now and tell him to hold the injunction. You don't get guarantees, I said evenly. You get to talk. If what you say has value, I'll consider calling Marcus. If you waste my time, I leave, and tomorrow morning Arthur Penhaligon gets a federal subpoena. Prescott swallowed hard. He looked around the noisy restaurant, making sure no one at the neighboring tables was paying attention to us. Grandpa Edmund didn't lose his fortune in the .com bust like Mom always claimed, Prescott said, leaning forward. He didn't die broke. He hated Mom. He knew exactly what she was. Before he got sick, he quietly liquidated his primary holdings. He set up an offshore trust. Ironclad, irrevocable. For who? I asked, though I already felt the answer settling like a stone in my stomach. For Callum, Prescott whispered. Only for Callum. The trust was structured to unlock on his 35th birthday. Edmund didn't trust me with the money, and he explicitly wrote Mom out of it. He left her the Connecticut house just so she couldn't contest the will. Callum was 34. His birthday was in 4 months. How much? I asked. Prescott looked down at his glass. $12 million. Principal. I kept my face perfectly still, but my mind was racing. $12 million. Edmund had left Callum an absolute fortune, enough to fund his research institute for the rest of his life, enough to insulate him completely from Vivianne's toxicity. If the trust is ironclad, how does Vivianne know about it? I asked. How do you? Because Edmund used the same estate lawyer for 40 years, Prescott said bitterly. A guy named Halvorsen. When Grandpa died, Mom went to Halvorsen's office and refused to leave until he showed her the entire file. She threatened to drag him through the New York Bar Association with fabricated malpractice claims if he didn't tell her where the rest of the money went. Halvorsen cracked. He showed her the offshore trust. Showing her a document doesn't give her access to the funds, I said. You just said it was irrevocable. It is, Prescott said. She can't touch the principal. But the trust generates interest. Nadia, massive dividends. And the clause Edmund wrote allowed for the maintenance and upkeep of the primary beneficiary's familial estate prior to the disbursement date. It was a standard boilerplate clause meant to pay the property taxes on the Connecticut house if Callum decided to keep it. The pieces suddenly clicked together in my head. The sickening, intricate math of it. She didn't use it for property taxes, I said, my voice dropping. Prescott shook his head. She used my firm. She had me set up the shell company in Cyprus. We created a series of fake vendor invoices for estate management and structural renovations on a property that didn't even exist. We submitted the invoices to the trust. For 7 years, the trust has been paying out those dividends directly into the shell company. That's the seed money. That's how Mom bought the yacht. That's how I kept my firm afloat when the commercial real estate market tanked. I stared at him, repulsed. You've been stealing your brother's inheritance for 7 years. We just took the interest. He hissed, defensive even now. The principal is still there. But the shell company is the conduit, Nadia. It's the only thing tethering Mom to the fraud. If you expose Arthur Penhaligon, the SEC looks at the shell. When they look at the shell, they trace the incoming wires back to Edmund's offshore trust. And it's an unregistered, foreign-held account that's been used for active money laundering, Prescott said, his voice cracking. The feds won't care that Callum didn't know about it. The moment they flag it as the source of illicit funds, they seize the entire $12 million under civil asset forfeiture. It gets frozen, locked in federal purgatory, and auctioned off to pay Mom's fines. Callum loses everything. Grandpa's real legacy disappears. I sat back against the leather booth. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into a dull, rushing sound in my ears. Vivienne hadn't just laid a trap for us today at the courthouse. She had built this trap 7 years ago. She had woven Callum's stolen inheritance into the very fabric of her own crimes, ensuring that if she ever went down, she would take Edmund's money with her. It was a dead man's switch. "So why are you telling me this?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady. "If you and Vivienne are tied together in this, why are you sitting here?" Prescott looked at me, a desperate, feral light in his eyes. "Because Mom doesn't know you missed the notary," he said. "She thinks she won today. She thinks you're going to fold and sign the restructuring agreement. But I know you, Nadia. I know you don't quit. And I know Mom is going to throw me under the bus the second the SEC gets too close." He reached into his briefcase on the seat next to him and pulled out a thick, unmarked manila folder. He slid it across the table toward me. "I'm done covering for her," Prescott said, his voice trembling. "That folder has every fake invoice she ever forced me to generate. It has the original trust documents Halvorsen gave her. It proves she orchestrated the entire laundering scheme without my knowledge, and that I was just acting as a directed financial proxy. You want immunity," I realized. "I want to not go to federal prison for the rest of my life," he shot back, a tear actually escaping the corner of his eye. "You want to protect Callum's inheritance? You take this folder to Marcus. You have him draft an immunity deal for me with the SEC. I testify that Mom acted alone in defrauding the trust. If I cooperate, the SEC seizes Mom's assets, but they leave the principle of the trust intact for Callum. You get your revenge, Callum gets his $12 million, and I walk away." I looked down at the folder on the table. It was heavy. It contained the absolute ruin of Vivienne Whitmore, but it also contained the confession of her son, wrapped up in a neat little bow of self-preservation. "You're a coward, Prescott," I said softly. "I'm a realist," he said, wiping his face. "Mom destroyed your piano. She mocked your miscarriages. She's been stealing from her own son for almost a decade. Are you really going to let her win just because you don't like me?" I didn't answer. I just picked up the folder, slid it into my tote bag, and stood up. "I'll talk to Marcus," I said. I walked out of the oyster bar, my chest tight, the weight of the folder pulling at my shoulder. I didn't know if Marcus could actually negotiate immunity for a guy as deep in the mud as Prescott. I didn't know if the SEC would spare Callum's trust. But I knew one thing for certain as I stepped out of Grand Central and into the fading New York evening. Vivienne was going to lose everything. My phone buzzed in my bag. I pulled it out, expecting it to be Callum checking in. It was a text, but not from my husband. It was from Marcus. "Nadia, call me immediately. Do not speak to Prescott. Do not agree to anything. I just pulled the corporate filings on the Cypriot Shell Company. Arthur Penhaligon isn't the primary shareholder anymore." I stopped walking. The sidewalk traffic swirled around me, people bumping into my shoulders as I stared at the screen. I typed back quickly. "Who is?" The 3 little typing dots appeared. They lingered for a long time. Finally, the text came through. "Vivienne transferred ownership 3 weeks ago. The primary shareholder of the Shell Company is you, Nadia." I dialed his number before my brain even fully processed the words on the screen. It rang exactly once. "How?" I demanded, pressing the phone hard against my ear to drown out the screech of a passing delivery truck on Lexington Avenue. "Cyprus has notoriously lax corporate registry laws, Nadia, you know this," Marcus said, his voice clipped and fast. "But they still require basic KICE protocols. Know your customer. Passport copies, proof of address, a certified digital signature. Whoever filed the transfer 3 weeks ago had all of your primary identification documents." I started walking again, my pace frantic, weaving blindly through the crowds of commuters. I didn't sign anything 3 weeks ago. I wasn't even working. I stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk. A man in a suit bumped hard into my shoulder, muttering a curse, but I didn't feel it. 3 weeks ago. "Nadia?" Marcus prompted over the line. 3 weeks ago, I was in the emergency room at Mount Sinai. I was bleeding through my clothes. Callum was sitting in a plastic chair beside my bed, holding my hand while we waited for the ultrasound technician to confirm what we both already knew. We were at the hospital for 14 hours. And because we had rushed out of our apartment in a panic, we had left our dog, a golden retriever mix, locked in his crate. Callum had called his mother. Vivienne was in the city for a charity luncheon. He asked her to run down to Tribeca, let the dog out, and feed him. He gave her the passcode to our front door. She had been alone in our apartment for at least 2 hours. My home office was right down the hall from the kitchen. My passport was in the top drawer of my desk, my tax returns, my utility bills, my physical signature on a dozen different client contracts. She was in my house, I whispered, my stomach violently turned. The sheer predatory calculation of it was suffocating. While I was in a hospital bed losing my 3rd child, my mother-in-law was sitting at my desk, photographing my passport so she could frame me for a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation. She used a proxy IP address to make it look like the transfer was initiated from your home network, Marcus continued, oblivious to the horrific personal context of the timeline. She set you up as the sole director and primary shareholder of the Shell Company. And because you're a senior forensic auditor, it looks incredibly convincing. Who better to run a shadow ledger than someone who hunts them for a living? If she goes to the SEC with this, I started, but my throat tightened so much I couldn't finish the sentence. If she goes to the SEC, they don't look at her, Marcus finished grimly. They look at you. They see an auditor using her brother-in-law's failing firm to launder stolen trust funds. She built you a perfect glass box, Nadia. If we file that injunction tomorrow morning claiming Arthur Penhaligon is a fraudulent notary, Vivienne will just hand the SEC the Cyprus registry documents. She'll say you forced the notary to stamp the deed. She'll say you orchestrated the whole thing. I have Prescott's folder, I blurted out. "What What? I just met with Prescott at Grand Central. He gave me a folder. He said it contains the original trust documents Halvorsen gave Vivian, and every fake invoice she forced him to generate for the Cypriot shell company. He wants immunity. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of Marcus's office door closing in the background. Where are you right now? Marcus asked, his tone dropping an octave. Walking back to the hotel. Get there. Lock the door. Do not let that folder out of your sight. Do not let the hotel staff in to clean. I am canceling my dinner and coming over. We have to see exactly what Prescott gave you, because right now, that folder is the only thing standing between you and a federal indictment. I hung up. I didn't walk the rest of the way. I hailed a cab, my hands shaking so badly I could barely open the door. When I swiped my keycard and pushed into our hotel room, Callum was pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown. He turned sharply when I walked in, relief washing over his face, but it vanished the second he saw mine. What happened? He asked, crossing the room in 3 strides. Did he have proof about the trust? I dropped my leather tote bag onto the glass coffee table. I felt entirely hollowed out. I looked at my husband, the man who spent his life studying ocean currents, who spoke softly and avoided conflict, who just wanted to be left alone to do his research. Callum, I said, my voice cracking. 3 weeks ago, when I was in the hospital, his brow furrowed in confusion. What about it? When your mother went to the apartment to let the dog out, did she ask you where anything was? Did she go into my office? Callum stopped. His eyes darted back and forth as he replayed the memory. She called me to ask where the dog food was, but I told her it was in the pantry. Why? I sat down on the edge of the sofa. She didn't just feed the dog. She went into my desk. She took photos of my passport, my bank statements, and my utility bills. I watched the realization hit him. It was a physical thing. His shoulders tensed, his jaw locking so tight I could see the muscle twitching beneath his skin. She transferred the Cypriot shell company out of Arthur Penhaligon's name, I said softly. She transferred it to me. I am the primary shareholder of the entity that bought her yacht. I am the legal owner of the account that has been siphoning your grandfather's trust money for 7 years. Callum didn't speak. He stared at the carpet, his chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. She knew I was auditing Prescott's firm. I continued, the sick logic of it all finally laying itself bare. She knew I was getting close to the missing $6.4 million, so she built a trapdoor. If I found it, she could just pull a lever and make it look like I was the one running the fraud. She used the day we lost the baby to do it. Callum turned away from me. He walked over to the minibar, gripped the edge of the granite counter with both hands, and just stood there, his back to me. His knuckles were bone white. I had never seen him like this. There was no sadness in his posture, no defeat, just a terrifying, absolute stillness. Where is the folder Prescott gave you? Callum asked, his voice dead and flat. I pointed to my bag. He walked over, pulled the heavy manila folder out, and dumped the contents onto the glass table. Dozens of pages spilled out. Bank wire confirmations. Emails printed from Prescott's private server. And there, right in the middle of the pile, was a thick stack of heavy watermarked paper bound by a blue legal ribbon. The original offshore trust documents drafted by Halvorsen. Callum picked up the trust documents. He flipped to the back page. There, in faded blue ink, was his grandfather's signature. Edmund Whitmore. $12 million, Callum whispered, reading the principal amount listed on the second page. He left it to me. He actually tried to protect me. Callum, we have a massive problem, I said, leaning forward. If we give this folder to Marcus to give to the SEC, it proves Vivian ordered the fake invoices. It proves I had nothing to do with the shell company. It clears my name. Callum looked up. Good, that's what we do. But if we do that, we hand the SEC the blueprint to the offshore trust, I said, forcing him to understand the cost. Prescott explained it to me. The trust is an unregistered foreign account that Vivian used for active money laundering. The SEC won't care that you didn't know about it. The moment they flag it as the source of illicit funds, they seize it. All of it. The entire $12 million gets frozen under civil asset forfeiture. You lose Edmund's money. Callum stared at me. I don't care about the money, Nadia. I care about you not going to prison. It's $12 million, Callum. It's your grandfather's legacy. It's the only thing in this entire family that wasn't poisoned. It is poisoned, he fired back, tossing the trust document back onto the table. She poisoned it the second she used it to buy a yacht. I am not letting my mother frame you to save a bank account I didn't even know existed an hour ago. There was a sharp knock at the door. Callum walked over and looked through the peephole. He opened it, and Marcus stepped inside. He was still wearing his suit, but he had taken his tie off. He looked at the papers scattered across the coffee table, then at me. Tell me everything, Marcus said, dropping his briefcase onto a chair. For the next 2 hours, the three of us sat around the glass table, painstakingly sorting through the evidence Prescott had handed over. Prescott was a coward, but he was a meticulous one. He had saved every email Vivian had ever sent him from her private encrypted account, printing them out and archiving them. Transfer the quarterly dividend to the Cyprus account. One email read, dated 3 years ago. Halvorsen is asking questions about the property taxes on the Connecticut house again. Have Arthur draft another fake renovation invoice for the roof. The auditor is getting too aggressive. Read another, dated just 2 months ago. She requested the Cypriot banking logs. Delay her. If she breaches the firewall, we execute the proxy transfer. She planned it for months, Marcus muttered, reading the email. She was just waiting for the right moment to get your physical documents to complete the case verification. And she got it when we went to the hospital, Callum said, his voice laced with absolute disgust. Marcus picked up the trust document. He read through the clauses, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the legal structure Edmund had built. Your grandfather was a smart man, Callum, Marcus said. This is an ironclad generation-skipping trust. It's a fortress. But Nadia is right. Because Vivian used it as the fountainhead for a money laundering scheme, it's legally tainted. If I take this folder to the SEC tomorrow morning to clear Nadia's name, the Department of Justice will file file an immediate civil forfeiture motion on the $12 million. It will be tied up in federal court for a decade, and you will likely never see a dime of it. Do it, Callum said instantly. Marcus looked at him over the rim of his glasses. Callum, you are walking away from generational wealth. You understand that? If we shield the trust and try to untangle this quietly, we might be able to save the principal. If we shield the trust, we leave Nadia exposed, Callum said, his voice rising, echoing off the hotel walls. My mother has the paperwork to destroy my wife's life. I am not playing games with a federal indictment. You take the folder to the SEC at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. You blow the whole thing up. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. There is one other complication. I looked up from a stack of bank transfers. What now? Prescott wants immunity in exchange for this folder, Marcus said, tapping the manila envelope. But he didn't give this to the SEC. He gave it to you. If we hand this over, the federal prosecutor is under zero obligation to honor Prescott's request for immunity. In fact, seeing his signature on all these fake invoices, they'll likely indict him right alongside Vivienne. He just handed us his own confession. Good, Callum said coldly. Let him burn with her. It's not that simple, Marcus said gently. If Prescott realizes we aren't protecting him, he will panic. And if he panics before the SEC secures the warrants, he could tip Vivienne off. If Vivienne knows we have the folder, she won't wait for us to go to the SEC. She'll preempt us. She'll file a police report claiming Nadia stole corporate documents and forged the emails to cover her own tracks. It becomes a race to the prosecutor's office. So we have to keep Prescott calm until tomorrow morning, I said, piecing it together. We have to make him believe he's getting an immunity deal, Marcus confirmed, which means someone has to draft a provisional proffer agreement tonight, have him sign it, and make him think he's safe. I'll do it, I said. Nadia, you can't, Marcus warned. You are the primary target of Vivienne's frame job. If you negotiate with a co-conspirator, it looks like witness tampering. Then I'll do it, Callum said. Marcus looked at my husband. Callum was a marine biologist. He spent his life on boats and in laboratories, measuring salinity levels and coral bleaching. He was not equipped to sit in a room with his venture capitalist brother and negotiate a fake federal immunity proffer. Callum, Prescott will see right through you, Marcus said cautiously. He knows you aren't a lawyer. He also knows I just bought his debt, Callum replied, his eyes entirely flat. He knows I own his penthouse and his firm's collateral. He's desperate, Marcus. He's looking for a lifeline. You draft the fake proffer agreement. I will take it to him. Marcus hesitated, looking at me for support. But I saw the set of Callum's jaw. I had never seen him look so much like his grandfather's portrait, immovable, heavy, and completely unyielding. Draft the paper, Marcus, I said quietly. Marcus pulled his laptop out of his briefcase and set it on the table. For the next 30 minutes, the room was silent except for the frantic clicking of his keyboard. He was drafting a document that looked exactly like a federal proffer agreement, complete with boilerplate DOJ language, but strategically missing the binding prosecutorial signatures. It was a bluff printed on hotel stationery. Marcus handed the printed pages to Callum. Where is he? He texted me an hour ago, Callum said, checking his phone. He's at the athletic club on 54th Street. He's staying in one of the guest suites there because the feds locked him out of his apartment. Don't let him read it too closely, Marcus warned. Just tell him it's a provisional hold to secure his cooperation before we file the injunction tomorrow. Get his signature on the last page. The second he signs it, he thinks he's safe, and he won't call Vivienne. Callum folded the papers, slid them into the inside pocket of his jacket, and walked to the door. Callum, I said, standing up. He stopped with his hand on the brass handle and looked back at me. Don't let him bait you, I said. Prescott is going to realize he's losing everything. He's going to try to make you angry. Just get the signature and leave. I'm not going to get angry, Nadia, Callum said softly. I'm just going to collect. He opened the door and walked out into the hallway. The heavy door clicked shut behind him. Marcus and I were left alone in the room with the ruins of the Whitmore family spread across the coffee table. Do you think he can do it? Marcus asked, staring at the closed door. I don't know, I admitted, sitting back down on the sofa. I looked at the trust documents, at the $12 million my husband was throwing away to keep me out of a cage his mother had built. My phone buzzed on the table. I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number, but the area code was 203. Connecticut. I picked it up. Hello? Nadia, a voice said. It was an older man, his tone raspy and formal. This is Arthur Penhaligon. I froze. The notary. The CFO of the Cypriot Shell Company. The man who had rubber-stamped Vivienne's forged deed of transfer. How did you get this number? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Prescott's assistant, Arthur said dryly. Listen to me very carefully. Vivienne just called me. She knows you met with Prescott at Grand Central. She had a private investigator following him. My blood ran completely cold. She knows Prescott gave you the folder, Arthur continued, his voice tight with panic. She told me to initiate a total burn of the server. She's destroying the original metadata that proves she sent those emails. But that's not why I'm calling you. Why are you calling me? I asked, signaling wildly to Marcus to come listen. Marcus leaned in, putting his ear near the phone. Because 10 minutes ago, Vivienne boarded a private jet at Teterboro, Arthur said. She's not waiting for tomorrow morning, Nadia. She's flying to a non-extradition jurisdiction right now. And she just authorized a wire transfer to drain the entire $12 million from Edmund's offshore trust. My heart stopped. Marcus swore under his breath, a sharp, ugly sound in the quiet hotel room. Arthur, I said, my voice eerily calm as the forensic auditor in me took the wheel. A $12 million wire doesn't clear instantly. It hits a swift compliance hold. Where is she routing it? To a private holding account in Dubai, Arthur said. But Nadia, she paid for priority routing. It clears in less than an hour. She has to route it through the Cypriot Shell Company first, right? The trust won't pay out directly to Dubai. It only pays the approved vendor. Yes, Arthur said, his breath hitching. It hits the Cyprus clearing account, then bounces to Emirates NBD. And who is the legal owner of the Cyprus account as of 3 weeks ago? I asked. Silence on the line. line. Then, Arthur exhaled. You are. I looked at Marcus. He was already opening his laptop, his eyes wide. Give me the login credentials, Arthur, I demanded. The banking portal. Now, Arthur hesitated. If I do that, I'm committing corporate espionage. Your former employer is currently drinking champagne on a tarmac while leaving you to take the fall for federal money laundering. I snapped, the adrenaline finally overriding my exhaustion. Give me the login. He read off the URL, the username, and the string of random characters for the password. I pulled my laptop onto my knees and typed them in. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, watching the screen. A two-factor authentication prompt popped up. It was sending a text to a phone number ending in 44. It's pinging a burner phone, I said. Arthur? Hold on, Arthur muttered. I heard him shuffling through desk drawers. I have the physical burner. She left it behind in her office. He read me the 6-digit code. I hit enter. The offshore banking dashboard loaded. Right there, in bold green numbers at the top of the screen, $12 million. Status, pending SWIFT verification. Destination, Emirates NBD, Dubai. I clicked on the transaction. A gray cancel button sat at the bottom of the screen. I moved my cursor over it. Nadia, stop, Marcus warned, his hand shooting out to hover over mine. Don't click it. It's right there, Marcus. I can stop the wire. If you cancel that wire from your laptop, you are actively managing the fraudulent shell company, Marcus said, his voice tight. You are establishing a digital footprint that proves you have control over the account. You are playing right into Vivienne's frame job. The SEC will look at the IP logs and see that the primary shareholder managed the stolen funds from a hotel in New York. I stared at the screen. He was right. It was a trap within a trap. If I don't click it, I said, my voice shaking, Callum loses his grandfather's legacy. Vivienne lands in Dubai with $12 million, and we spend the next 10 years trying to stay out of federal prison. I looked at the timer on the screen. The compliance check was finalizing. We had minutes. Arthur, I said, leaning closer to the speakerphone. You're sitting at your desk in Connecticut, right? On Prescott's corporate network? Yes, Arthur said warily. Log into the portal from your terminal, I ordered. Nadia, no, I am not getting involved. You notarized the forged deed, Arthur. You're already involved, I fired back. But if you cancel this wire from your terminal, the IP log shows that the CFO of the company reversed the transaction. It shows you caught the fraud. You saved the trust. And I will draft the proffer agreement for your immunity right now, Marcus added smoothly, catching my drift. I will represent you, Arthur. I'll take this directly to the DOJ tomorrow morning and tell them you blew the whistle on Vivienne Whitmore. You won't be a co-conspirator. You'll be the star witness. Heavy breathing on the other end of the line. The swift timer ticked down. 3 minutes left. I can't just cancel it, Arthur said, panic edging into his voice. If I cancel a vendor payout, it triggers an automatic fraud alert back to Halvorson's law firm. They freeze the trust entirely. The principal gets locked. Then don't cancel it, I said, my eyes scanning the transaction details. Amend the destination. Marcus looked at me. To where? Send it back to the source, I said. The money is sitting in the Shell's clearing account right now. Just change where the outbound wire is going. Arthur, Marcus said, taking the lead. Amend the routing number. Send it back to the Whitmore Legacy Trust in the Isle of Man. A long, agonizing pause. Then, the frantic sound of a keyboard clacking in Connecticut. I'm in, Arthur said. I'm changing the destination field. I watched my laptop screen. The portal refreshed. The destination field changed. It no longer read Dubai. It read Whitmore Legacy Trust. Confirm it, I told him. Confirmed, Arthur breathed. The screen refreshed one last time. The green numbers flashed. Status. Processed. The $12 million didn't go to the Middle East. It went right back into the impenetrable legal fortress Edmund Whitmore had built for his grandson. The shell company's balance dropped to zero. I slumped back against the sofa, closing my laptop. Marcus let out a long breath and took off his glasses, rubbing his eyes. Now what? Arthur asked over the phone. Now, Marcus said, his professional composure returning. You pack an overnight bag, Arthur. You drive to Manhattan tonight. You come straight to my office, and we write your sworn statement before the sun comes up. The line went dead. The hotel room was finally quiet. The oppressive, terrifying weight of Vivienne's trap had broken. She was flying over the Atlantic, completely oblivious that she was going to land in Dubai with a frozen credit card, an empty bank account, and a federal warrant waiting for her at the embassy. 10 minutes later, the door clicked open. Callum walked in. He looked completely drained. His jacket was unbuttoned, his tie pulled loose. He held the fake proffer agreement in his right hand. He walked over and handed it to Marcus without a word, then collapsed into the armchair across from the sofa. He signed it, Callum said, running a hand through his hair. He didn't even put up a fight. He practically begged me to take it. He's terrified of his own shadow right now. Callum, I said gently. He looked over at me, the exhaustion evident in the deep lines around his mouth. The money is safe, I told him. All of it. It's back in your grandfather's trust. He stared at me, uncomprehending for a few seconds. I explained the phone call from Arthur, the wire transfer, and the IP address reversal. I watched the heavy burden he had been carrying for the last 8 hours finally lift off his shoulders. A small, disbelieving laugh escaped his chest. She's going to land with nothing, Callum said, shaking his head. She's actually going to lose. We file the injunction at 8:00 a.m., Marcus said, smoothing out the proffer agreement on the glass table. With Arthur's testimony and the reverse wire trace, we can prove the Cypriot shell was transferred to Nadia fraudulently. We insulate the trust, we clear your name, and we hand the SEC everything they need to. Marcus stopped talking. He was staring at the last page of the document Callum had brought back. What is it? I asked, sitting forward. Marcus frowned, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. He traced a line of blue ink at the bottom of the page. Callum, did you read this before you took it from him? No, Callum said, his guard instantly going back up. I just made sure he signed the signature block. Why? Marcus turned the paper around so we could see it. Because Prescott didn't just sign his name. He added a handwritten addendum. I looked at the scrawled blue handwriting squeezed into the margin beneath beneath the signature line. I agree to provide full testimony regarding Vivienne Whitmore's fraudulent activities, provided the SEC also grants blanket immunity to my silent partner in the Cypriot entity. Silent partner? Callum asked, his brow furrowing. Who is his silent partner? Marcus looked up at me, his expression grave. He wrote your name, Nadia. I stared at the ink. Nadia Whitmore. He doesn't know Vivienne forged the transfer, Marcus said quietly. Prescott actually thinks you were in on it. He thinks you've been running the shell company with his mother this whole time, and he's trying to use your immunity as leverage to save himself. Marcus didn't speak for a long time. The hum of the hotel room's mini fridge filled the silence. A low, rhythmic clicking that felt louder than it should have. He set the paper down on the glass top, his fingers pulling away slowly, as if the ink itself might burn him. He thinks you're a co-conspirator, Marcus said again just to make sure the words were sitting heavy enough in the room. Prescott signed away his own cooperation by trying to implicate you. The moment I hand this proffer to the prosecutor with that handwritten note attached, they aren't going to look at Prescott as a whistleblowing victim. They're going to look at him as a defendant trying to negotiate protection for an accomplice. Can we cross it out? Callum asked, stepping forward from the armchair. His voice was cold, stripped of any hesitation. Can you redact his little note? It's a signed legal document, Callum, Marcus said, looking up with tired eyes. If I alter a physical signature page after it's been executed, I'm committing an offense that disbars me before sunrise. We take the document as it is, or we don't use it at all. I look down at the coffee table, at the scattered bank statements, the forged deed, the watermarked trust papers, and now Prescott's pathetic, desperate attempt to drag me down with him, just so he could sleep in a bed that wasn't behind bars. It was so transparent. Prescott had spent his entire life watching Vivienne manipulate every situation, and the only trick he had ever learned was how to shift the blame to whoever happened to be standing closest when the floor gave way. We use it, I said. Marcus blinked at me. Nadia, if we walk into the federal building tomorrow morning with this exact document, the investigator is going to look at Nadia Whitmore as the primary name on the Cyprus entity and see your name scribbled by your brother-in-law as his partner in crime. They will issue an immediate subpoena for your personal accounts. Let them, I said. I stood up from the sofa, my legs finally feeling steady beneath me. The exhaustion that had weighed me down all afternoon had burned away, replaced by a sharp, clear-headed focus. Let them subpoena my accounts. Let them look at every paycheck I've earned, every client I've audited, every dollar in our savings. Because when they look at my books, they're going to see a clean ledger. And when they look at Prescott's files, they're going to see a man who panicked, lied on a proffer agreement, and tried to frame an innocent auditor to save his own skin. Callum walked over and stood beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. He didn't say anything, but his hand found mine, his fingers interlacing with mine, warm and solid. Marcus, Callum said quietly, file the injunction, file the proffer, include the note. Let the prosecutor see exactly what kind of man Prescott is. Marcus looked between the two of us for a long moment. Then, a slow, grim smile touched the corners of his mouth. He closed his laptop, picked up the papers, and slid them neatly back into his leather briefcase. All right, Marcus said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. I'll have my senior associate at the firm prep the filing packets by 7 a.m. We meet at the federal courthouse at 8:30. Bring all your digital records, Nadia. Every email Prescott sent. Every log Arthur gave you. We're going to give the Department of Justice a very interesting morning. He let himself out, the door clicking shut behind him with a clean final sound. The room felt smaller now, the city outside humming with the relentless energy of New York at night. Sirens wailed somewhere down on 2nd Avenue, a distant howling rhythm. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the grid of yellow cabs and glowing office towers. Do you think she's on the plane yet? I asked softly. Arthur said she boarded at Teterboro 40 minutes ago, Callum replied, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. By the time she lands in Dubai, her accounts will be locked, her shell company will be dissolved, and her son will be sitting in a federal holding room explaining to an agent why he tried to frame his sister-in-law. She thought she won, I murmured, leaning back against him. Even in the mediation room when she laid out that fake deed, she thought she had outsmarted us. She doesn't know how to do anything else, Callum said. She spent 60 years treating people like chess pieces. She forgot that people aren't wood. We stood there for a long time, watching the lights of the city blur against the glass. The grief in my chest was still there, heavy and dull, but the suffocating panic had lifted. The lie was over. The dynasty was done. The morning sun came up sharp and blinding over the Manhattan skyline, casting long shadows across the Federal Plaza by the time Callum and I walked up the broad stone steps. Marcus was waiting for us by the security gates, holding a thick red expandable folder. He looked like he hadn't slept, but his eyes were sharp. The bankruptcy judge is already on the bench, Marcus said, greeting us with a brief nod, and the U.S. Attorney's Office received our emergency filing 20 minutes ago. Prescott is already inside. Federal marshals picked him up at the athletic club an hour ago. Already? I asked. When I submitted the proffer agreement with his handwritten note at midnight, the duty magistrate didn't see a whistleblower, Marcus said, a faint grin touching his lips. He saw a co-conspirator attempting to subvert a federal proceeding by naming an active auditor without cause. They brought him in for questioning immediately. We walked through the metal detectors, past the humming security monitors, and down the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the courthouse. The air smelled of old paper, floor wax, and institutional coffee. When we pushed open the heavy oak doors of the mediation room, it wasn't the quiet, empty space from the week before. Prescott was sitting at the far end of the long oak table. Two federal agents in dark suits stood quietly behind his chair. His face was pale, the designer suit from yesterday looking rumpled and damp with sweat. He looked up as we walked in, his eyes wide and bloodshot, zeroing in on me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. You set me up, Prescott whispered, his voice cracking as we took our seats across from him. You took the folder, you took the deal, and you let them take me. I didn't look at him. I opened my laptop, placed it flat on the wood, and plugged in my encrypted thumb drive containing every forensic ledger I had spent 14 months building. At the front of the room, the side door opened and a federal bankruptcy judge, a woman with iron gray hair and a severe expression, walked in and took her seat behind the elevated mahogany bench. Callum Whitmore versus the estate of Vivienne Whitmore and associated entities, the judge read, adjusting her glasses. She looked down at the thick stack of papers Marcus had filed that morning. The court has reviewed the emergency injunction, the reverse wire confirmation from the Isle of Man Trust, and the sworn statements provided by Arthur Penhaligon. She looked up, her gaze sweeping over the room until it landed squarely on Prescott, then shifted to the empty chair beside him where Vivienne should have been sitting. Where is Mrs. Whitmore? The judge asked. Prescott swallowed hard, his hands trembling on the table. She's out of the country, Your Honor. She was out of the country, Marcus corrected smoothly, standing up and sliding a single sheet of paper toward the bench's clerk. The Department of Homeland Security intercepted her private flight during a refueling stop in Bangor, Maine, 30 minutes ago, Your Honor. She is currently being escorted back to New York by federal marshals. A sharp gasp escaped Prescott's lips. He slumped backward in his chair, the last bit of color draining entirely from his face. The judge glanced at the paper, then looked back down at the files. The assets of the Cypriot entity are frozen. The $12 million has been successfully repatriated to the Primary Generation Skipping Trust, and the forged deed of transfer has been formally voided ab initio. She paused, letting the silence settle over the sterile room. Mr. Prescott Whitmore, the judge said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. You are remanded into federal custody pending a bail hearing on charges of wire fraud, asset concealment, and submission of fraudulent documents to a federal investigation. The two agents behind Prescott stepped forward, their hands resting firmly on his shoulders. He didn't fight back. He just stared blankly at the polished wood of the table, his mouth slightly open. The great and powerful Whitmore dynasty finally reduced to a frightened man in a rumpled suit, waiting for the cuffs to click. They led him out through the side door, the heavy metal click of the latch echoing off the high ceilings. Marcus began packing his files into his briefcase, looking up with a satisfied nod. Well, that concludes the mediation. Callum didn't move. He sat still in his chair, looking across the empty room where his mother and brother had spent a lifetime building an empire out of other people's ruin. Then, very slowly, he turned his head and looked at me. There was no triumph in his eyes, no hollow vengeance, just a profound, steady peace. Let's go home, Nadia, he said softly. I closed my laptop, slid it into my bag, and took my husband's hand as we walked out of the federal courthouse together into the bright, uncompromising morning light.